Frank Sinatra stopped mid-sentence, looked into the audience, and said, "Is that you?" Johnny Carson understood immediately what was happening and had to stop the show. It was March 1976. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank, California. Thursday night. Frank Sinatra was the guest, always a ratings bonanza, always electric, always unpredictable. The chairman of the board sitting in the orange guest chair, sharp suit, that legendary voice filling the studio with stories about Vegas and recording sessions and the old days. Johnny was in his element. The monologue had killed. The audience was warm. Sinatra was relaxed and funny, trading barbs with Johnny the way only old friends could. Ed McMahon was chuckling at the desk. Doc Severinsen's orchestra had nailed every cue. It was perfect television. Sinatra was telling a story about Dean Martin, something about a prank involving a hotel room and a live chicken, when his eyes drifted past Johnny, past the cameras, toward the tiered audience seating on his right. His voice trailed off. Mid-sentence. Mid-laugh. Johnny noticed immediately. "Frank? You okay?" Sinatra didn't answer. He was staring at someone in the third row. His face had changed, that cool, controlled Sinatra composure cracking just slightly. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Then he stood up. Not the casual standing of someone stretching their legs. This was abrupt. Urgent. The orange guest chair scraped backward. Frank Sinatra, one of the most famous men in the world, stood up in the middle of a live Tonight Show interview and pointed directly into the audience. "Is that you?" Sinatra's voice cracked slightly, loud enough for the boom mics to catch. "Tommy? Tommy Sullivan? Is that really you?" The studio fell into confused silence. 300 people suddenly holding their breath. The cameras scrambled, operators looking at each other uncertainly, waiting for direction from the control room that wasn't coming because nobody knew what was happening. Johnny's smile vanished. Completely. Instantly. The famous Carson grin that had charmed America for 14 years disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. Because Johnny Carson knew exactly who Tommy Sullivan was. Carson stopped mid-show. The entire studio froze. In the third row of the audience, a man in his early 50s slowly stood up. Simple gray suit. Thinning hair. Glasses. He looked like 1,000 other middle-aged men you'd pass on any street in America. Unremarkable. Forgettable. Except Frank Sinatra recognized him. And so did Johnny Carson. The man, Tommy Sullivan, raised one trembling hand in a small wave. His face was wet with tears. He nodded, unable to speak. Sinatra took a step toward the audience, then stopped, remembering he was on television, that cameras were rolling, that this wasn't how things were done. He looked back at Johnny, and for just a moment, these two titans of entertainment locked eyes with an understanding that needed no words. Johnny stood up slowly. He looked at his producers in the wings, at Bobby Quinn in the control room, at everyone frantically trying to figure out what to do. Then Johnny Carson did something he'd never done in 14 years of hosting The Tonight Show. He walked off the stage and into the audience. The control room exploded into chaos. "What's he doing? Do we cut? Do we stay on him? What the hell is happening?" But the cameras followed. Because even the camera operators understood they were witnessing something real. Johnny walked up the aisle between audience sections, climbed 3 steps to the third row, and stopped in front of Tommy Sullivan. The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Then Johnny reached out and pulled Tommy into an embrace. The studio audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. Most chose silence, sensing something sacred was unfolding. Sinatra had followed Johnny into the audience. He stood at the end of the row, watching, his own eyes wet. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1943. Johnny Carson wasn't always Johnny Carson, king of late-night television. In 1943, he was an 18-year-old kid from Norfolk, Nebraska, who'd just enlisted in the Navy. World War II was raging. Boys were becoming men overnight, shipped off to basic training, then to the Pacific, then sometimes to graves their families would never visit. Johnny ended up at Millie Creek Naval Station in Pennsylvania for training. He was assigned to a barracks with 40 other recruits, all of them terrified, all of them pretending not to be. In the bunk next to Johnny's was Tommy Sullivan from Brooklyn, loud, funny, the kind of guy who kept everyone's spirits up during the grinding days of drills and inspections. Frank Sinatra wasn't Frank Sinatra yet either. He was a skinny kid from Hoboken with a voice that made Bobby Soxer scream, just starting to get famous, just beginning to understand what his talent could become. In late 1943, Sinatra did a USO show at Millie Creek. Small venue. Maybe 200 sailors packed into a mess hall converted into a makeshift theater. Johnny and Tommy were in the third row. Johnny remembered that detail with crystal clarity 3 decades later. Both of them 19 years old, both of them about to ship out to the Pacific. Sinatra sang for 90 minutes. Standards. Swing. That voice filling the room, making homesick boys forget for a moment that they might not make it home. After the show, Sinatra stayed. Talked to the sailors. Signed autographs. Took photographs with a borrowed camera. Tommy Sullivan asked Sinatra if he'd take a photo with him and his buddy Johnny. "We ship out next week," Tommy explained, his Brooklyn accent thick. "I want something to show my girl when I get back." Sinatra put his arms around both of them. Someone snapped the picture. 3 young men smiling for the camera, none of them knowing what the future held. "You boys stay safe out there," Sinatra said, shaking their hands. "When this is over, look me up. I'll buy you a drink." Tommy and Johnny laughed. "Sure, Frank. When we get back, we'll definitely track down Frank Sinatra for that drink." They shipped out 6 days later. USS Bunker Hill. Aircraft carrier headed for the Pacific Theater. Johnny was assigned to communications. Tommy worked in the engine room. For 8 months, they survived kamikaze attacks, brutal heat, terror, and boredom in equal measure. Then came May 11, 1945. 2 kamikaze planes hit the Bunker Hill within 30 seconds of each other. The carrier erupted in flames. Nearly 400 men died. Johnny made it topside, helped pull burned sailors from wreckage, survived by a combination of luck and grace. Tommy Sullivan was in the engine room when the second plane hit. He never made it out. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Johnny came home from the war different. Everyone did. He never talked about the Bunker Hill. Never mentioned Tommy Sullivan. He went to college on the GI Bill, got into broadcasting, built a career through sheer talent and relentless work ethic. By 1962, he was hosting The Tonight Show. By 1976, he'd interviewed presidents and movie stars and musicians and writers. He'd made America laugh thousands of times. He'd become an institution. But he'd never forgotten Tommy Sullivan. Never forgotten the kid from Brooklyn who died in a Pacific engine room at 19 years old. And now, 31 years later, Tommy Sullivan was standing in the third row of Johnny Carson's studio. Except it wasn't Tommy Sullivan. "I'm Michael Sullivan," the man said, his voice shaking. "Tommy was my older brother." Johnny closed his eyes. Understanding washing over him. "Oh God. I was 7 when he died," Michael continued, tears streaming down his face. "I barely remember him. But my mother, she talked about him every day until she died. She had that photograph. The one with you and Mr. Sinatra. She kept it on the mantel. She'd tell me stories about Tommy. How funny he was. How brave. How much he loved his little brother even though he barely knew me. Sinatra had moved closer, standing just behind Johnny, listening. She died last month," Michael said. "Cancer. 83 years old. And at the funeral, my aunt gave me something. She said my mother wanted me to have it. Said I'd know what to do with it." Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph. Old. Worn at the edges. The image of three young men in Navy uniforms, arms around each other, smiling at the camera. Tommy Sullivan. Johnny Carson. Frank Sinatra. 1943. Johnny took the photograph with trembling hands. He hadn't seen it in 31 years. Didn't know it still existed. "My mother's last words to me," Michael said, barely able to speak, "were find them. Tell them Tommy loved them. Tell them he talked about that night until the day he shipped out. Tell them." His voice broke completely. "Tell them my brother died happy because he met Frank Sinatra and made a friend named Johnny." Backstage, Johnny made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. The studio was absolutely silent. You could hear the hum of the stage lights, the soft rustle of the curtains. 300 people barely breathing. Johnny looked at the photograph for a long time. His thumb traced over the face of young Tommy Sullivan, forever 19, forever smiling, forever alive in that frozen moment before the war took him. Then Johnny looked up at Michael. "Your brother saved my life." Michael's eyes widened. "What?" "May 11th, 1945. The Bunker Hill. I was supposed to be in the engine room that morning. Tommy traded shifts with me because I'd been up all night on communications duty. He said I looked like hell and needed sleep. He took my shift." Johnny's voice cracked. "He died in the engine room. The place I was supposed to be. For 31 years I've lived with that. For 31 years, I've wondered how to repay a debt I can never repay." Sinatra put his hand on Johnny's shoulder. "Jesus, Johnny? I didn't know. Nobody knew," Johnny said quietly. "How do you tell that story? How do you explain that your entire career, your entire life, exists because a kid from Brooklyn took a shift you were supposed to work?" He looked at Michael again. "I've interviewed thousands of people on this show. Made millions of people laugh. Built a career doing what I love. And every single bit of it exists because your brother was kind to a tired sailor one morning in 1945. Michael was sobbing openly now. So was Sinatra. So was Ed McMahon, still sitting at the desk but no longer trying to hide his tears. The audience had given up any pretense of composure. Cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment, producers in the control room crying as hard as anyone. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny handed the photograph back to Michael. "Keep that. That's your family's treasure. Your mother was right to save it." Then Johnny reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, a tarnished military compass, the kind sailors carried during the war. "But I want you to have this," Johnny said, pressing it into Michael's hands. "Tommy gave this to me the night before we shipped out. He said if we get separated out there, use this to find your way home. I've carried it every day for 31 years. In my pocket during every single episode of this show. It's how I find my way." Michael stared at the compass, unable to speak. "Your brother gave me more than a compass," Johnny continued. "He gave me a future. He gave me every laugh I've ever gotten, every show I've ever done, every moment of this impossible career. And I want you to have this so you'll always know, Tommy Sullivan mattered. His kindness mattered. His sacrifice mattered." Sinatra stepped forward. "Kid," he said to Michael, his voice rough with emotion, "I've sung in front of presidents and kings. I've played every major venue in the world. But that night at Millie Creek? That little USO show for a couple hundred sailors? That's one of the performances I'm proudest of. Because I got to meet your brother. And he was good people." Michael looked at both of them, two of the most famous men in America, and saw only two friends honoring a promise made 31 years ago. "Thank you," Michael whispered, clutching the compass. "Thank you for remembering him." Johnny pulled Michael into another embrace. Sinatra joined them. Three men standing in the third row of a television studio audience, connected across decades by one 19-year-old sailor from Brooklyn. The studio erupted. Standing ovation. Not the performative applause of entertainment, but the reverent applause of people witnessing something sacred. Johnny walked back to his desk, Sinatra beside him. They didn't finish the interview. They didn't need to. Johnny simply looked at the camera and said, "Sometimes television gets to be more than entertainment. Tonight was one of those nights." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the show, Johnny had the photograph professionally copied. One went to Michael Sullivan. One went to Frank Sinatra. And one stayed in Johnny's desk drawer until his final episode in 1992. The compass sits in the Smithsonian today, in the broadcasting section, with a small plaque. Tommy Sullivan 1925 to 1945. He gave Johnny Carson a future. Michael Sullivan attended every Tonight Show taping for the next 16 years. Johnny always knew where he was sitting.